welcome everyone. I'm conscious that having, much to my self-satisfaction, managed to get the backdrop of the Cyberweek behind me. It's actually now thrown me into darkness because it's such a bright background that so I apologize if I appear as a sort of silhouette here. As now I practice as a commercial mediator primarily in the UK. I was a solicitor, lawyer, attorney before that for many years, working out of Oxford in the UK. I describe myself as a former lawyer. And I, together with a number of us, both here in the UK and from other countries, have signed something called the Mediators Green Pledge. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in due course, and we'll have a look at it. And what I'm really keen to do is to hear from you guys on what you think about this, what you think is good, what you think's bad, what else you think we could be doing. I will try and answer questions as best I can. And the way I thought we'd structure this 60 minutes or so that we have is that I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting. You'll forgive me if a lot of what I'm talking about is actually I'm preaching to the choir, as it were, and you already are familiar with some of these ideas. But I'm very conscious of the fact that I've been involved in a number of international organizations over the years through my work, and I remember back in about 2007, 2008, I was at a conference of lawyers and accountants in the US. And I said to the organizers, I'd like to organize a lunch table where we can discuss climate change and talk about opportunities that arise for lawyers and accountants in dealing with this. And I was, somewhat to my surprise, rather warned off this by saying, well, Jonathan, you're making a political statement there. As soon as you use the word climate change, you're actually aligning yourself with a certain political strand, and not everyone here would be comfortable with that. And I have to say, I was somewhat surprised by that. But that was 14 years ago, and in my view, the world has moved on massively, and the understanding's moved on. I'm sure I don't need to labour the point, but just a few comments and statistics about sustainability and climate change, and I personally very much link the two together. I think sustainability and the ability to look after, whether it's the seabeds, our forests, our agricultural world, natural world, is as important as the global warming and the climate changes that are happening. These two are absolutely linked. And I, as I hope to make clear over the next few minutes, feel quite, I suppose, dare I as a lawyer, passionate? I like to think so, and it is something that's really important. I mean, there was a UN report on biodiversity that was issued in 2020, and that, perhaps not surprisingly, said that none of the commitments that the countries and the delegates had made 10 years previously had been met in the 10 years since they made those commitments. Farming was still, to a large extent, unsustainable in many parts of the world. There was overfishing. The burning of fossil fuels wasn't being reduced sufficiently quickly. And there are a number of reports that are coming out, and it's quite difficult to work out which ones are more authoritative than others. And actually, I sort of take the view that there's a tide, as it were, moving here. They refer, quite a lot of these reports, to tipping points, such as the melting of the ice cap in Greenland or the West Antarctic ice sheet, the thawing of the permafrost in the northern regions. And it seems to me that climate change now is a fact. It's been a scientific fact, I think, for a long time. It's now accepted as a fact by an awful lot of people. I entirely accept that there's still an argument around the causes and the primary causes of climate change. That is still, I respect the fact that there are different views held there quite genuinely. But what's undeniable, I think, is the fact that as a race, as a species, we are pumping much more CO2 into the atmosphere than we have in the past. And that's undoubtedly contributing to global warming. I think there's scientific consensus. Sorry, something I should have said is that if I'm saying something and you're disagreeing with it or whatever, or it raises questions that you'd like us to explore, can I just invite you to put that in the chat? And we'll look at that. So as we're going along, I hope very much that we'll move into a more of a discussion in a bit. But if there are particular points, rather, by all means, just note them down. But if you want to put them in the chat, then we won't lose them and we can pick them up as we go on. So, I mean, the problem is one can keep going with these statistics. You can talk about the fact that Greenland has now recorded rainfall at its highest point for the first time ever. And the cost last year to the economy, the world economy of high impact weather events was £50 billion and $50 billion, I think. And one rather ends up with something like this. Let me just you end up with a picture like this, and I don't know what you think when you see these pictures, because it's quite common. And I think there are probably two reactions in a sense. One is if I were those animals, I'd be running for my life because these are one of nature's most effective killers. But equally, if I'm looking at this from the comfort of my own home, it's a different reaction. And it's very easy to be manipulated, I think, by these reactions. And as a mediator, I am keen not to be a bearer of doom and gloom on these things. And I heard a very interesting talk a couple of weeks ago by a chap called Norman Crowley at a conference, and his title was "How Climate Change Can Be Solved in the Next 10 Years." And I thought, oh yeah, okay, well, I've got to hear this one. And but actually, he was very interesting. He wasn't shying away from the challenges, but what he said was, there are vast resources available to humanity if we want to use them. There are trillions of dollars available for investment. There's far more money in the system that could be used for investment than is currently being used. And what one needs to do, his message was, we need to tap these people and persuade them that it's worth sinking what will be very large sums of money into exploring ways and developing new ways, particularly of heating and providing energy, of how we deal with building, of how we deal with transport, all these sorts of things. And just a couple of statistics. Now, I have no way of knowing how valid these statistics are, and I remember that I can't remember who said it. You've got lies, you've got damn lies, and you've got statistics, and in that order. But what he says, that if you take a car, it takes about 98% of the car's energy to move the vehicle and about 2% to move the passengers. Now, that sounded quite interesting. He talked about the markets that are out there for new products, particularly non-meat products. In 2020, what I call non-meat meat, if you know what I mean, the market was about $4 billion. In last year, 2021, that market had grown to $14 billion. Now, when you start talking about these numbers, all of us people are going to think, hang on, there's an opportunity here. And I think, so I'm definitely, I like to think I'm being realistic in terms of the challenge we face and what we know under no doubt as to the urgency. But it's not all doom and gloom, I think. I think there are opportunities out there. But the second strand, and this is the thing that really rather shocked me the other day, was a completely different survey that was undertaken by a sustainable development agency called Futera. And they polled 20,000 people. And what they found was that 20%, so that's about 4,000 of the people they polled, said they thought humanity could reduce climate change, but they weren't going to do anything about it. And they called these people climate defeatists. There were another 11% who said they don't think humanity can do anything about this. These are this organization called climate fatalists. And these people, the climate fatalists, who believe that there's nothing we can do, are most likely to be younger and poorer in terms of the section that were interviewed. In fact, they went as far as to say that 1 in 5 young people worldwide don't believe they've got a serious future. And I actually just stopped at that point and thought, that's an awful statistic. That really is an awful statistic. Now, I'm one of the old people here. I've got 3 sons and 2, nearly 3 grandchildren, and that really made me think. I can't live with myself and allow them to grow up in a world without hope, where they're thinking, I don't think there's much of a future. And actually, what that made me do was think much more about the day job of myself as a mediator. I mean, I'm assuming that most of us are involved in conflict resolution of one way and another. And this is an ODR conference or Cyberweek. And so we're all going to, in some shape or form, be involved in some form of dispute resolution. And that really got me thinking about the day job and thinking, what do I do? What's my role? My role, surely, is to bring some optimism, some hope into difficult situations. My role is to come in and say to people, actually, let's just look at this a different way. Let's just stand back and see if we can achieve what you want to achieve by a different route. And I'm sure we all work in very similar ways, albeit using different platforms and different methodologies. But none of us, I suspect, have power to compel. We only have power to persuade. But what we need to do is to bring hope and to bring the potential for better outcomes. I was very struck by someone who said a long time ago that if Martin Luther King, in his famous speech, had said, last night I had a nightmare, and my nightmare was, I don't think people would have listened. He would have lost his audience. But he didn't have a nightmare, he had a dream. And he gave them hope. And I think, so that coming to this, because I think it is very easy to be the sort of what I would call, oh dear, the poor polar bear, what can we do? We can't do anything. It's all too big. It's the oil company's fault. To just for what it's worth, my own view is that the oil companies could be the savior to a large extent of the challenge with fossil fuel, because they're the only organizations with the resources and the cash and the understanding of what's actually going on. And I remember talking to someone who worked at Shell, I think it was, in the UK, and he said, water conservation is one of our biggest concerns where we are, that we are desperate to preserve water because we use so much and we cannot afford to waste it. And so I think, again, I feel with my mediator hat on, what I don't want to demonize anyone. I want to engage them. I want to turn them around. I want them to see what opportunities are there. And so it's against that background that I wanted to turn to the Mediators Green Pledge, which is what I wanted to sort of focus on in terms of today. Just a little bit of background to that. There's a Scottish mediator by the name of John Sturrock who wrote a blog a couple of years ago, simply saying a little bit of what I'm saying now, but saying, okay, we can stand on the sidelines and wring our hands and say, isn't this awful? This is just what a horrible thing. Or we can actually say, now, what can we do? Is there anything we can do? And mediators are not going to change the world. Let's be realistic. That others will do that. But at the same time, we can be more than just bystanders, I feel. And that has two impacts. One is we might actually make a practical difference. So for instance, 6 years ago, I stopped getting paper documents for my mediations. And I did that partly because I got just fed up with taking large amounts of paper around with me that nobody looked at. And so so for the last 6 years, I've had all my files delivered electronically. And I calculated earlier this year that in so doing, me alone has saved over 100,000 sheets of paper. Now that's one mediator, one practice, saving 100,000 sheets of paper. You start to multiply that, and then actually it does make a bit of a difference. So let me put up the pledge. If I get this working properly. Oh, where are we? Right. There we are. Sorry, I'm trying to. Forgive me. I seem to have got. Let me just. Sorry, I just want to get rid of that. And there we are. Right, we're there now. And so what we did was we tried to put something together that actually said something without being so dogmatic that people would be turned off. And I think those of us who put this together are still very much of the view that we're on a learning curve here. This can definitely be improved. I think there's more that one can do, and I'd be very interested to hear what people think. I mean, I'm conscious that the first point, if screen sharing video technology is appropriate, accessible, and acceptable to all concerned, I encourage its use in all aspects of my mediation practice. Now, I'm conscious that I'm talking to people here for whom that's the way they live. They're already there. I'm not one of those people. If you'd asked me pre-pandemic in the early part of 2020 whether I thought I could mediate online, my answer would have been no. I could see the benefit of it, but it was not for me. Like so many, this particular old dog had to learn a new trick because there was no alternative. And since then, I've probably done, I've done well over 100 mediations. And one of the very surprising statistics I found is that the settlement rate of these cases has tended to be about the same as the settlement rate when I was previously mediating in person. And that surprised me, that did. I was not expecting to get that result. Now that the pandemic is over and we're not forced to mediate online, I do a mixture of online and in person. What this pledge does is make me think, should I be in person? Should I be online? And gives me the ability to talk to the parties and say, why are we all meeting together? Do we need to do that? How can we best deal with it? Now, my own experience is that there are definitely some mediations which are much better in person and more likely to settle. There are other mediations where we really don't need to be there, and it's much more sensible to do it online. The second, so that's one aspect that I think is really has generated quite a lot of interesting discussion in the mediation world and the people I've been talking to. The second is how to travel. Now, I think it depends a lot on where you're based and which country you're based in. There are definitely some countries that have a superb public transport network. There are others that really don't. And it also depends where you are in the country. In the UK at the moment, we've got a real problem with the rail network, in that there are strikes on a regular basis, which are making it very difficult to go to mediations in person in an environmentally friendly way. You have to end up driving or whatever quite often. Flights, again, I think is quite an emotive topic. I'm not someone who demonizes those who fly. In some parts of the world, it's the only realistic method of travel. If you're an island nation like the UK, it's very difficult, although it can be done to go by train, but realistically, flying is likely to be more appropriate. But it's thinking about it and thinking about whether your trip is necessary and looking at why you're doing it. For better or worse, I have my children have decided. One has decided to live in Spain, and one's decided to live in Australia and bring up their families there. Now, the one thing you can't do on Zoom or any other network is hug a grandchild. And so I'm a great believer that it's important to see people in person. And so but what this pledge does is make me think about this. I've talked a little bit about electronic means and the fact that you really don't need to have all this paperwork in front of you. And I know, again, I'm sure you're with it. But I'm conscious that the world, that the people I'm dealing with, very often, these are people who have got ingrained habits. And one of the things we're trying to do is challenge those habits and say, are you sure you should be doing this? I have a friend who's a well-known mediator, and I was pleased to hear that he now gets all his documents electronically. I was less pleased to hear that when he gets them, he then prints them all out. And I just think, really? Why are you doing that? But there we are. You know, I'm not going to tell him how he runs his life, but I am going to challenge him from time to time just to think about it. this, I think, I mean, a lot of these points, I think, are sort of self-explanatory in many ways. I think I don't need to go through them all. I'm not a complete convert, and I'll say it now, to the world of online dispute resolution. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is I am not at all persuaded that the systems, whatever system we use, is entirely confidential. I don't know enough about the, I call it the mechanics, probably the electronics of the system to be able to speak with any authority about it. All I can do is look at the regular disclosures and hacks of emails, of information, and I'm thinking if governments, if banks, if these organizations with what I would hope would be fairly sophisticated security systems are being hacked, then my Zoom mediations may well be. And there's also a carbon footprint to everything we do. There's a carbon footprint in this. It's obviously much less, but I think again I look at the fact that I'm doing a balance the whole time between what people are paying me for, namely trying to help them resolve a problem, a dispute, a conflict, and trying to do it in the most effective way for them, but also in the most environmentally friendly and sustainable. And so the way I see what this Green Pledge is a way of making people think about their own practices. And it's very much not about the disputes that we mediate and we seek to resolve. It's about the way we mediate and the way we seek to resolve it and how our practices work. There's an overlap between the two. But I'm pleased to say that since we've launched this pledge, and you'll see if your eyesight's good enough that there's a web address at the top, WOMAC, WOMACC.org, where you can see this. And we've now got nearly 700 people, mediators worldwide, signed up to this. And so we've clearly struck a chord. And as I say, it's still something that we're learning. And I hope as we move into a discussion part of this, that perhaps we can explore different ways in which we can move this forward. I mean, is there something that we've missed? Is there something more that we can be doing? What do you think are the really big points in here that we should be looking at? I'm very keen to hear what people have to say. So at that point, I think I'm going to stop talking and see whether others want to join in. I'll stop the share at this stage so that we can hopefully we can have a bit of a conversation. Now, I'm conscious that for most people, your mic's off, your camera's off, and you may well just be off making yourself a cup of coffee or doing something else with your time. But if love to hear from you and love to hear what comments you might want to make about what we've been talking about. Hi there.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your leadership on this and for getting a pledge circulated that stimulates the thinking of practitioners and of the field in general, and nudging us to hold ourselves accountable for the ways in which we impact the earth. So I really appreciate that. And I have a question that goes slightly outside what you've talked about already, and I just love your thoughts, but it reminds me of something you said at the beginning. I'm wondering what new challenges there are in this world in which we have people who are claiming that there is no scientific proof of climate change happening, and many others who say there is. The interveners that want to hold out the perspective that you are talking about, which is not to talk about the nightmare, but to talk about the dream. And part of the dream is helping us understand each other and move forward. But do you have comments or wisdom to share about when there is not a shared sense of facts?
I have found both when I was a chairman of a law firm in the UK where I had 100 partners, and my mediation training was enormously useful in that scenario as well as others. And what I found was when I was dealing with people who disagreed with what we were trying to do was you needed to respect people. I'm a great believer that you should always, if you can, respect the person, even if you disagree strongly with their view, unless their view is clearly untenable for obvious objective reasons. And so I used to have certain partners that I just treated as roundabouts, to use the English expression. They were obstacles, but they weren't. I wasn't going to wait until I got them out of the way. I go round them and carry on. And I think that's what one has to do with who say, no, there's no such thing as climate change. This has always happened. I think you have to just look at the scientific evidence as a whole. There's always going to be a breadth of science, but if you've got 80 or 90% of competent scientists saying one thing and only 5 or 10% saying something else, well, in my view, that's pretty persuasive. An 80% chance of success, an 80% likelihood that something's happening, generally speaking, makes me think that's likely to happen rather than a 5% chance of something happening. Those are odds I'd follow. I think one also has to be aware that there are definitely organizations that are funding misinformation. It's always been the case. We saw it massively with the tobacco companies in the middle of the 20th century, when even though they were aware of the scientific evidence, they were funding advertising and pseudo-scientific research, seemed to be saying there was no health risk from tobacco. Well, with history, we can look at that. And definitely there are organizations, and I'm not quite sure why they're doing it. That I find curious, but there are definitely organizations pumping money into this. And I've mentioned the oil companies, and I think certainly a few years ago, 10, 20 years ago, they were strongly trying to deny climate change. And I don't think I'm naive to think that they're not still disseminating doubt, because that's the best thing they can do, is just make people doubt and say, well, I'm not sure. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have the purists, the green agenda, who say, well, you've got to do nothing to do with oil can be right. But that's not how we live our lives. And an awful lot of people would suffer if you went down that route. And the perfect can be the enemy of the good, I think, here. And the green eco-warriors, whilst to some extent I respect and admire what they do, to some extent I think it's they're fighting the wrong battle. They're useful up to a point, but actually my experience is you get a lot further by a dialogue and appealing to our common interest. So that's rather a long-winded answer to what I think is a very difficult question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm also slightly tongue-in-cheek reminded of Steve Jobs' response back 15 years ago or so when he was asked, well, what about all these people who won't use computers, who won't use the internet? What's your strategy for dealing with them? And his answer was death, by which he meant he'll never change them. They aren't the people that he's trying to change. The people he's trying to change were the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that, which is what we've seen. And people like me now have to catch up because my sons and the more junior people in the firm where I used to work, they were way ahead of me in this. And that's another strategy. Not one I'm commending, but it's out there. You have to be an optimist in the way we work. It's like I often say, no one's going to employ a pessimistic mediator. You know, you turn up and you say, well, you lot haven't got a hope of sorting this out, but I'll do what I can. You know, you're not going to get a lot of business. You go in saying, right, let's see what we can do. It's like, have you ever met a pessimistic fisherman? You know, I'm going to go and spend all day by the river, but I'm not going to catch anything. You think you're going to catch something with that last cast. And apologies for those who think fishing is a brutal sport, but you understand what I'm saying. And the history of mankind is of invention, is of things, of finding different ways of doing things. What I think I find so frustrating is that you've got some extraordinarily wealthy people now in the world, people who have made vast amounts of paper money, and rather than spending, you've got a few, sort of the Elon Musks of this world, who are actually very interestingly inventing. I mean, the whole concept of an electric car in 20 years becoming the most valuable car company in the world. I find that staggering. And it shows it can be done in some ways. But the idea of these wealthy people all working out whether they should go and live in New Zealand or Greenland or Alaska to avoid the coming meltdown, I think don't do that. Stick your money into finding out whether hydrogen is a viable way of replacing fossil fuel, or whether there's a way we can reverse the warming effect in the Arctic, and we need their money. But I think blockchain's a good example of something that may or may not be the way forward. It'll be something like that. It'll be something, it's a bit like, I don't know, I think of some of the technologies that you think at the time are going to be really good, and then they die, they never get anywhere, because something else that's just a bit better is the one that everybody uses. And whether it's going to be blockchain or something else, I can see how blockchain could be really useful. I'm not actually convinced that will stop people having disputes, because I don't think we're going to change human nature. And that's a challenge. And speaking as a mediator, I'm encouraged by that, because it means I'll probably always have some work to do. And that's just the way life is. I think in relation to the first, what can mediators do rather in a wider context than simply looking at the way they run their practice? I think to try and open up arguments that have become really binary, where it's us and them, it's black or white, It's you're either with us or against us. And the world isn't like that. And I think that's a skill set and a learning that as mediators we should be particularly able to deal with, to introduce. We had it very much in the UK with the Brexit debate and the leaving of the European Union, where it became a very much we're either in or we're out. And as this plays out, the subtleties and the nuances that were never properly discussed and debated are becoming apparent. And I think that's an area where as mediators, we can encourage people to say, well, what about what else you're saying? And I think in the US you've got a challenge at the moment that there seems from the reports, as far as we can read this side of the Atlantic, that there's a division that you're either in one camp or another, but the world isn't like that, and that's one area where mediators can get involved. I think technology does have a big role to play because it's being used to polarize people at the moment. The problem, I think, with a lot of particularly social media technology is it enables people to find those that share their particular point of view and enables them to block out anyone who might have a different, an opposing view or just a different take on things. Now, this is something new that as humans we're having to understand, because previously we lived in a society where you had to get on with the people that you saw in the shop, you saw in the cafe, in the bar, in your church, in your social grouping, or in your sports, and you will come across people with whom you disagree. And you come across people who say, well, I don't like his politics, so I don't like the way he does. But you'd have to get on because you did things together. My concern, I think, is that we can now live, as a result of what we're doing now, we can live a fragmented life where we only interact with people who share the same views as us. And the shop have got to a point where we don't even need to talk to anyone in the shop. We can do it all with our phone and get our goods and an automatic checkout. So there's no communication there. Transport's much the same. And if we're working from home, it's that there are a whole lot of challenges that technology has introduced that I don't think we've really understood the social impacts of yet. Technology is neutral. It's a thing. It's the way people are using it and putting it to use, and that's where I think, as mediators and those the dispute resolvers, we probably need to be more proactive and more thinking about, well, what are the consequences of what we're doing and how we're working, and then how can we change that? And I don't have the answers. I mean, I can see the issues. I can see, and it worries me a lot, and that's why I probably I try and attend social groupings wherever I can, and particularly go and listen to people that I think, I'm not quite sure what this is about, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how many people are doing that these days in that way. So it's a bit of a roundabout route. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our hour, and I think it's important, in my view, that a great believer in sticking to time. I found that meetings that I've chaired, if they know I stick to time, people come to the meetings. If they think they run on, they find excuses not to attend. That's part part of my experience of social groupings. Thank you. And by all means, but I've given you the website address. I'm more than happy to continue this online, offline, and really encourage people to sign up or to raise questions or whatever. Thank you for your time.